He didn't even turn around when he said it. Standing in front of the oversized mirror in our master bedroom, tying a navy blue tie that didn't match his suit, he looked more like a man rehearsing for a press conference than someone asking his wife to leave her own home. "You'll need to leave the penthouse," he said, like he was requesting dry cleaning to be picked up. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the reflection, his fingers moving with mechanical confidence, like this wasn't the first time he had practiced those words. Behind him, sprawled across the velvet sectional I had chosen with my own hands before our wedding, sat a woman I had only seen once before, at a military gala I was being honored at. She hadn't looked at me then, too focused on him maybe. But she looked at me now, smirked even, crossed her legs slowly like she was marking territory. "Would be nice if you had your things packed by the weekend," she added, reaching for the espresso cup I left on the table that morning. I watched her sip from it like she lived there. I stood still. No outburst. No broken glass. I'd spent 14 years learning how to regulate my pulse in active zones. I wasn't going to give either of them a show now. The penthouse wasn't just an address. I had signed the deed on a rainy Wednesday afternoon 3 months before our wedding, while still in uniform. It was bought in full, no mortgage, using a military performance bonus I earned during an overseas deployment that took 3 lives from my unit and a piece of me I still haven't named. I came back different, focused, determined to own something permanent. Not just land, certainty. The building was new, top of a tower in Arlington. Steel-lined glass. Views of the river, quiet. I had negotiated the price myself, memorized the square footage, and signed my name on every page of that contract with a pen I kept from the base. Then came marriage, quick, elegant, a ceremony with more diplomats than friends. I thought it was love. I thought I had chosen stability after war, but some battles wait until you're unarmed. "Your name's not on anything," he said casually now, glancing at me through the mirror as he smoothed his hair. "The lawyers will handle the paperwork. Should be straightforward." I studied the reflection, not the words, the tone. The careful detachment of someone who had been coached, rehearsed. His jaw clenched slightly at the end, but it wasn't guilt. It was control. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Just stepped back slowly and walked to the guest room I had converted into a small reading space. It still smelled like my old textbooks, military journals, and the leather armchair my father left me before passing. I closed the door, locked it gently, and sat in the same chair I had napped in after long briefings, after debriefs, after night missions. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder named Housing Legal, and scrolled until I found it. Property title, Plaza 7C Tower Lane. My name, alone. I had made a decision the day I bought the place. A habit from years of living under orders, always maintain an exit strategy. When we got married, he never asked about the paperwork, and I never volunteered. I wasn't hiding anything. I just wasn't giving everything either. It was a lesson I had earned in blood. Trust, but never disarm. The hallway outside was quiet now. No footsteps. No whispered negotiations. Just the hum of the air conditioner and a low jazz track he always played in the mornings to feel sophisticated. I waited for the saxophone to fade, then stood, walked to the closet, and retrieved the red leather folder I had tucked into a fireproof safe when we moved in. It contained 3 documents: the deed, the prenup, and a sealed envelope I hadn't opened in 5 years. I slipped all of it into my duffel, folded my old uniform on top, and sat down again. There was no war cry, no speech, no confrontation, just silence, and the knowledge that every soldier waits until the terrain is mapped before the strike begins. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I slept on the floor of my study, boots still on. At 6:04 a.m., I left before either of them woke up. I didn't slam doors. I didn't touch a thing that didn't belong to me. I closed the front door quietly, almost like I had just stepped out for a run. What they didn't know, and what he would find out too late, was that I had already started moving long before they spoke. That every sentence, every smirk, Every glance in that mirror was recorded in my mind like an after-action report. That his little coup wasn't just clumsy, it was jurisdictionally irrelevant. Because what I built, I never ceded, and when they laughed at me as I left, they assumed it was over. But I had only just begun revisiting the rules of engagement. I remember the light that day. Sharp, cold, indifferent. The kind of light that slices through glass without warming a room. I had just landed back on U.S. soil 3 weeks earlier, still sleeping in intervals, still jumping at doors that opened too fast. The war hadn't followed me home, but it hadn't let me go either. It stayed in my spine, in the back of my teeth, in the way I scanned every room before I sat down. And yet, that morning, as I stood inside the title office on a quiet corner in Arlington, something about the pen in my hand, heavy, matte black, standard issue, made me feel calm, steady. The woman across the table, a notary with faint silver roots in her hair and a tired smile, pushed the stack of papers toward me. "You've reviewed everything, correct?" she asked. I nodded. I had read each page 4 times. I had highlighted, underlined, annotated, not out of distrust, out of habit. Years of mission briefings do that to you. You don't just sign and smile. You account for fallout, error margins, chain of command impact. Even on real estate deals, full purchase price. "No loan?" she asked again, confirming the unusual nature of the transaction. I nodded again. "Military bonus," I said. She didn't ask which branch or what the bonus was for. Most people don't want to hear what kind of deployments lead to 6-figure compensations. They want the headline, not the body count. She just smiled faintly and continued. The building was still under construction when I first saw it. I had been hunting for something simple, something quiet. Most of the listings felt staged, hollow, like IKEA showrooms pretending to be homes. But this one, it had potential. The penthouse floor was framed but unfinished. No walls yet, no glass, just steel beams and panoramic space. I remember stepping out onto the raw cement floor, boots crunching gravel, and feeling like I was looking at the skeleton of my own future. Clean, unclaimed, and mine. The decision to buy it outright wasn't impulsive. I had spent the last 9 years in active service, 5 of those overseas, 3 in combat intelligence. I had no family I spoke to regularly, no pets, no debts, and no delusions. What I had was a habit of saving, a risk tolerance forged under enemy fire, and a need to own something no one could ever remove me from. Something that couldn't be reassigned or revoked with a transfer order. So I bought it. 3,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, office, floor-to-ceiling glass, a balcony that curved along the east side like a private landing pad. I signed every page of the ownership documents by myself, sitting in that beige office, while the world outside moved on. The notary said, "Congratulations," and I nodded. No one hugged me. No champagne. No selfies. Just a firm handshake and a key I wouldn't use for another 6 months. When I finally moved in, I unpacked slowly. I didn't fill the rooms with much. Military life had trained me to live out of a duffel. Even now, the space remained spare, intentional. 2 mugs, 2 chairs, 1 couch, a bed without excess. Everything else was function over flourish. I liked it that way. It felt like breathing room. Then came him. We met at a military fundraising gala. He was in a tux that fit too well, with a smile rehearsed for high-end rooms. "A consultant for defense contracts," he said. "Not enlisted, not reserve. Civilian adjacent." He dropped names easily, shook hands with fingers curled slightly inward, the way career networkers do. But he knew how to listen. That was his first weapon. He listened well. He asked questions most men avoided. About the deployments, about what it felt like to brief generals, about the silence after explosions. I didn't fall quickly. But I did fall. He was patient, curated. He made me feel like I didn't have to explain everything, like the chaos inside me wasn't frightening. And he loved the apartment. That was one of the first signs I missed. He mentioned it too often. Admired the view, praised the open floor plan, complimented my taste in art. Subtle things. "You really made this place something special," he'd say. Not, "You have a beautiful home." And once, it must be nice, knowing no one can take it away. The irony tastes different now. We got engaged 9 months after we met. He proposed on the balcony, with the city lights behind him and a ring that glinted too perfectly in the dark. I said yes because it felt like a surrender I could finally allow. I had spent so long fighting, so long alone. I wanted to believe in rest. I never told him the penthouse was in my name only. I never told him because he never asked. And because I wasn't ready to rewrite the chain of ownership in my life for someone who hadn't proven they could stay when the quiet got loud. The only concession I made was letting him move in. No paperwork. No legal transfer. Just space. I thought that was enough. Before the wedding, we signed a prenup, his request. He said it was for simplicity. I agreed, and I reviewed every clause. I wasn't offended. I was relieved. 2 people protecting themselves. It felt clean, respectful. The document clearly stated that all prior assets, properties, and individual purchases remained the sole property of the original owner. There was no commingling clause, no transfer of title, and he signed without hesitation. I should have known then. Men who don't flinch at contracts aren't necessarily honest. They're just ready. Still, I married him. Small ceremony. No family by choice, a few former colleagues, a few of his. He moved in permanently the next day. We redecorated slightly, his idea. A new rug here, a different table there. Nothing major, nothing threatening, just presence. Looking back, it was never about the decor. It was about soft occupation. He placed himself in every corner of that apartment like a slow leak, gradually filling the silence with himself until it no longer felt like mine. But it was mine. Every document said so. Every pixel of that PDF in my locked digital vault confirmed it. So when I saw him that morning, in the mirror, adjusting his tie like the penthouse was his to dismiss me from, when I heard her voice, smug and effortless, like a woman already measuring curtain lengths, it wasn't pain I felt. It was ignition. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I didn't say, "This is mine." I didn't need to. Because when you hold the deed in your name, you don't need to shout. You just need to move. And I did. That night, I initiated the first transaction. A quiet one. Nothing dramatic. Just a visit to a registrar I knew from my days overseeing military legal coordination. She didn't ask why I needed notarized copies. She just handed them to me with a nod. "Updating estate plans?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. By morning, I had started the process of legally isolating every asset tied to me. Not to hide them. To protect them. To prepare. Because I had seen what betrayal looked like in combat. It never arrived with a knife. It arrived with kindness and the wrong flag. And this man adjusting his tie while planning my eviction from a home I bought, was not my ally. He was just the last op I needed to complete. And this mission? It was personal. I hadn't seen her up close until that morning. Her voice had reached me first, from the living room, soft and sharp in the way only someone fully confident in their position can be. When I emerged from the hallway with the quiet weight of a woman who has worn combat boots in real war zones and walked unnoticed, she was already laughing. Not loudly, more like a hum, smug and elegant, punctuated by the clink of her coffee cup against the saucer I never used. She looked up when I stepped into the room. No surprise on her face. No awkwardness. Just acknowledgement. The way one professional might glance at another across a negotiation table, both knowing what cards are in play. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply leaned back against the curve of my velvet sofa, the one piece I had splurged on, and smiled like I was the guest in my own command post. She was wearing pale silk. Too relaxed. No handbag in sight, which told me something deeper than if she had stood and screamed. She was already settled. Already unpacked, at least emotionally. Her hand rested on the armrest the way women do when they've mapped a space and claimed it as theirs. Fingers spread like a blueprint. Her legs crossed like permanence. "She's not leaving until the weekend?" she asked aloud. Not to me directly, but not avoiding me either. The kind of sentence meant for both parties to hear and respond to differently. That should give her time to clear out. I didn't speak. I watched her. Let the silence stretch. Measured, weaponized. The military teaches you about confrontation, about reaction, but it also teaches you about restraint. How the best counterstrike is stillness, until it isn't. My husband, or the man I had once called that, entered the room with a legal pad in hand and a posture that had changed since the last time he kissed me on the temple. "We're just trying to make this easier on everyone," he said, like a therapist soothing a broken marriage that wasn't his. "You'll have the weekend to move. The lawyers will be in touch early next week. It's all standard. No animosity." The word animosity landed like dust on steel. I had spent years negotiating tactical withdrawals in hostile regions. I knew when someone was trying to make their ambush look like a business transaction. I nodded slowly. "Understood," I said. The other woman raised her eyebrows, clearly waiting for the tantrum. The cracked voice. The moral high ground. The tears. I gave her none of that. I just walked to the bookshelf behind them, one of the few things I had built myself, and pulled down a small, worn black folder. Inside, it was a list I had started 3 days earlier. Inventory, steps, logistical separation, no legal jargon. Just objectives. I added a check mark next to item 3. Observe dynamic between subject and secondary individual. Then I walked to the kitchen and made tea. They left not long after. She stepped into a pair of heels too high for daytime, and he held the door for her with a practiced hand that had once helped me carry groceries after physical therapy. They didn't say goodbye, didn't linger. It was as if I had already been removed from the space, as if their presence had scrubbed me out like a misplaced photo in a family frame. But I was still there, and I was documenting everything. That night, I didn't pack. I watched, listened, took note of what he touched, what she moved, how they operated when they believed I was no longer a threat. She returned briefly after dinner, alone this time. Wore different shoes, went straight to the bedroom and came back with one of my scarves. I watched through the hallway mirror as she wrapped it around her shoulders without a second thought. I smiled. It wasn't the scarf. It was what it meant. They thought I was already defeated, that I had accepted exile, that my silence was compliance. They were mistaken. The next morning, I rose at 05 Rao, not because I had somewhere to be, but because muscle memory dies slow. I made black coffee in a mug that still had my unit's insignia on the bottom, sat on the edge of the bed, and began making calls. Not to friends. I didn't have many, to institutions, my financial advisor in D.C., my former JAG contact who now specialized in property law, and the quiet, efficient woman who had helped me notarize the deed the first time. I wasn't asking for help. I was laying groundwork, confirming, documenting, aligning timelines. At 08:42, I sent the first email of my formal response. Not dramatic, just a simple legal notice that I would be reviewing the situation before making any decisions. I copied a lawyer, then another. I attached documents, names, signatures, the original purchase agreement, the prenup, the clause they'd overlooked, the one that said, "All previously owned assets shall remain sole property unless otherwise renegotiated in writing post-marriage." By 09 FARC, I had already confirmed 3 inconsistencies in what my husband had assumed were jointly claimed finances, and by noon, I had initiated a property review with the city's registration office. The woman on my couch didn't know any of this. She just knew what she saw. A woman who had left the penthouse without raising her voice. She thought that meant surrender. She thought wrong. 2 days passed. They were quiet. She returned each night around 7 p.m., stayed until 10, left her things. Hairpins in the bathroom, her perfume on the towels, a wine glass still on the coffee table. He had started moving like he already owned the place, left his shoes by the door, changed the position of the throw pillows, rearranged the spice rack like it annoyed him. I didn't interfere. I wasn't watching to punish. I was watching to confirm something I already knew. Entitlement expands in silence. And when you don't resist immediately, they mistake it for permission. But it wasn't permission I was giving them. It was distance. Enough to hang themselves with. On Friday morning, their deadline, I walked into the living room as they sipped espresso over my old Mission binder, which he had repurposed as a laptop stand. "I'll be out today," I said. They both looked up, surprised. "No problem," she said quickly, smiling. "We appreciate your understanding." He nodded, but not as confidently as before. I didn't smile back. I just walked to the guest room, zipped up the 2 military-grade duffels I had packed hours before, and walked past them without breaking stride. I didn't slam the door, didn't look back, didn't remind them what I once did for this country. What I had seen, what I had survived, I didn't need to, because by the time the weekend ended, they would both come to understand something they had never been trained for. You don't take ground from a woman who built the battlefield. And while they toasted their short-lived victory inside walls they believed were theirs, I was already halfway to a federal building with a folder full of paperwork and a strategy they'd never see coming. It was packed beneath the oldest item I owned, a folded dress uniform I hadn't worn in 5 years, still sealed in its garment bag, pressed with care that felt ceremonial. I had only kept it for one reason, in case the day ever came when someone tried to erase what I had done. What I had earned. I never imagined it would be needed inside my own home. The red folder was beneath it. Slim, leather, military issue. It didn't look like much. But inside was every major decision I had ever made on paper. Originals, certified copies, notarized declarations, the deed to the Penthouse, the signed prenup, the letter of commendation from my commanding officer the day I left active duty, my last will and testament, and tucked behind the inner flap, clipped silently in place, was a document I'd drafted, but never filed, a formal transfer restriction, legally binding under state law, asserting that no party may claim partial or full ownership of the property without the express consent of the original title holder. I had written it the week we got engaged. Not because I thought he would do this, but because I knew he might. In combat intelligence, we were taught that enemy intent is often less important than enemy capacity. Don't ask, would they hurt you? Ask, could they? And the man who now paced inside my home, adjusting artwork he didn't buy, sipping from glasses I selected, inviting women onto furniture I assembled, he could. The day I left, I took the red folder with me. No suitcases, no hysterics, just the folder and a hard flash drive with encrypted backups. I wore jeans, combat boots, and a black windbreaker with no insignia. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to disappear correctly. I drove myself across the bridge into D.C., taking side streets like muscle memory, past intersections I hadn't crossed since my deployment return debrief. I didn't stop for coffee, didn't check my phone. I pulled into the underground garage beneath a bland federal building most people mistook for a post office. But I knew it was a registrar office that handled sensitive veteran property holdings and federal asset protection. They didn't ask me why I was there. They saw the ID, the credentials, the face that didn't blink, and they understood. I met with a woman named Yvette. Mid-50s, quiet, wore reading glasses on a pearl chain that never touched her actual face. She reviewed every document I brought without speaking. Just flipping pages, making small pencil marks in the margins like a surgeon checking vitals. "You're not late," she finally said. "You're right on time." She asked one question. "Do you want this to escalate?" "No," I said. "I want it to end before it begins." We filed 3 motions. 1, to reaffirm sole ownership of the Penthouse under post-service veteran property protection, backed by federal contract payout traceability. 2, to restrict any third-party usage of the property for legal purposes until rightful title review. And 3, to trigger a quiet audit on any financial activity connected to the address in the last 60 days. That last one would hit him hardest. Because what he didn't know, what most people didn't, is that when your name is connected to federal defense infrastructure, even as a veteran, your property exists under a different lens. a quieter, more protective one. You don't just lose a house. You compromise an asset. And asset compromise comes with consequences. Yvette handed me a sealed envelope with stamped copies and looked me directly in the eye. When they realize what you've done, it's going to be too late for them to fix it. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded and took the envelope. That afternoon, I checked into a temporary housing unit for veterans in transition. Clean, no frills. Gray walls, thin towels. But it had one thing the Penthouse hadn't given me in months. Silence that belonged to me. I sat on the edge of the small bed, placed the red folder on the desk, and opened my laptop. I logged into an account I hadn't used since 2019, one I kept under a name I never changed after my first deployment. A shadow account. A storage vault. Inside were hundreds of files, receipts, statements, recordings. I pulled one up, a security camera feed from the hallway of our penthouse. Dated 2 weeks before I was told to leave. In it, he walks out of the master bedroom. She follows. He gestures toward my bookshelf, the one with my commendation coin cases and personal items. She laughs. He kisses her. Then they walk out together. I watched it 3 times. Not out of pain. Out of precision, there was no rush. No urgency. Only calculation. And now it was my turn. By 6 p.m., I had updated all my access permissions. Changed digital locks. Restricted entry codes. Disabled smart home functions that I had let him manage out of convenience. The security system now alerted me, not him, of all movement. My name was the only one listed in the owner dashboard. At 7:12 p.m., the first ping came in, an alert, unauthorized attempt to access smart panel. At 7:15, key code failure. At 7:17, manual override attempt registered. Panel locked for 24 hours. At 7:19, my phone rang. I let it ring until it stopped. 3 minutes later, another call. This time from a different number. I ignored that too. At 7:28, I received a text. Hey, did you change the locks? I didn't answer. At 8:02, another. Can you call me? We're locked out. I thought you were leaving today. I turned the phone off and placed it face down on the table. Then I opened the red folder, slid out the sealed envelope from Yvette, and reread the cover letter. Property lockdown, authorized under Federal Asset Protection Code 41 Delta. Below that, enforcement activated. No further action required from owner. I closed the folder, took a slow breath, and for the first time in days, I exhaled without pressure behind my eyes. The woman on my couch had laughed. She had reached for my cup, worn my scarf, rearranged my life like it was decor. But by morning, she'd be holding something else entirely. Panic. Because no matter how confident she felt in his arms, no matter how smug her little smile had been when she gave me my deadline, there was one truth she couldn't rewrite. She was a visitor in a place built by a soldier, and soldiers don't surrender ground, not even after the war is over. There's a moment in every mission when the opposition believes they've won. It never arrives with a flag or a speech. It shows up in posture, in the way they slow their movements, the way they smile a second longer, the way they lower their guard. And that's the moment, always, that we move. I left the penthouse without a single visible tremor. My keys still worked when I locked the front door behind me, but I didn't look back to confirm. I didn't need to. I had already launched. The internal sequence hours before they watched me disappear with nothing but 2 duffels and a red folder. From their side of the glass, it must have looked like submission, like retreat, like a woman who had finally accepted that her place in the story was over. What they didn't realize is that I was never the story. I was the trigger. The following morning, I entered the operations phase of what I had privately titled Protocol Grayvale. Not out of melodrama, but out of habit. Name the mission, strip it of sentiment, assign a target, then begin. Phase 1 had already succeeded. Withdrawal under perceived vulnerability. Let them think they'd removed me. Phase 2 began at 600 with a single login to the Arlington Land Records portal. My name still held the deed. The transfer restrictions were in place. The federal audit had been initiated, but this was never just about property. It was about possession, and possession wasn't physical. It was legal, tactical, psychological. I opened my encrypted vault and pulled files I hadn't accessed in years. Records of all major home improvements paid solely by me, digital receipts tied to my personal accounts, emails confirming furniture deliveries in my name only. Every detail I had archived out of instinct now became a payload. Not for revenge, for reinforcement. By 0700, I had already compiled and submitted a formal affidavit to the county registrar reaffirming asset control. At 0735, I filed a motion to freeze any attempts at secondary lease or subletting on the property. At 0750, I emailed my legal contact in D.C. with the subject line, "Quiet enforcement request." He replied in less than 6 minutes. "Understood. I'll proceed discreetly. They wouldn't know yet. That was intentional. Let them keep sipping espresso on furniture they didn't own. Let them keep believing in weekends and deadlines. Let them laugh a little longer." I had learned during a long-range surveillance operation in Kandahar that the most efficient strike is the one no one feels until it's over. At 09:10, I received the first confirmation email. The property is now locked under two-factor ownership verification. No entity may alter utility access, digital locks, or mailing status without primary holder biometric input. In short, they lived in a box they couldn't control. I wondered if they'd noticed that the thermostat no longer obeyed voice commands, that the fridge settings had reset, that the elevator required a keycard that no longer functioned under his credentials. By noon, I knew they had, because my phone lit up with a call from an unlisted number. I let it ring until voicemail took over. Then came the second call, then a third, then a text. "Hey, minor issue with the smart system. Can we talk?" I didn't answer. At 12:43 p.m., another message. "It's probably a tech bug. The fridge reset and the lights went dark for a second. Just a heads up. No signature, no apology, no awareness." That's the thing about people who build palaces on other people's work. They never expect the foundation to pull away. I spent the afternoon finalizing Phase 3 transfer of all shared accounts, minimal as they were, back to full private control. Initiation of credit score locks, disassociation of his name from all utilities, withdrawal of digital permissions from any platform we once shared access to, including streaming services, calendar links, even the grocery delivery app. At 3:27 p.m., I submitted a notice to the building's management. "Please restrict concierge package access to authorized personnel only. As title holder of Unit 24A, I hereby revoke permissions granted to third parties not listed on lease documentation. Any violation will result in legal escalation." They confirmed receipt within 30 minutes. By dusk, he would no longer be able to pick up a single parcel without being flagged. That evening, I visited the bank, not just to ensure my accounts were secure, but to close the one credit card he had once used to pay for a rug I never liked. I asked for a printed final statement, signed the closeout paperwork, and requested a hard copy to be mailed directly to my legal counsel's office. The bank manager, a woman named Karen with sharp eyeliner and a sharper mind, slid the envelope across the desk and whispered, "Good for you." I nodded. I wasn't angry. I was precise. At 7:12 p.m., I received a group of text messages. The progression was predictable. First, "Weird. Door won't open. Did you change the codes?" Then, "Building said something about authorization. Are you okay?" Then, "I thought we agreed you'd be out by the weekend. It's Saturday." Followed by, "Can we please have a grown-up conversation?" I turned my phone face down. People who want to control a woman's silence will always call her resistance immaturity. By 8 p.m., I knew the property management had acted. My building key was still active. Theirs were not. I didn't gloat. I didn't pace. I ran a bath in my temporary apartment, sat in still water, and reminded myself that this wasn't about teaching anyone a lesson. It was about completing the mission. He had taken my space. He had tried to evict me from the very floor I built with my own hands, using my own pay, earned from deployments that left men crying in sand and mothers screaming at folded flags. He had sat there, beside that woman, drinking from my cup and smiling into a mirror that I had paid to hang. And now, he was locked out of every room I ever let him walk into, and I hadn't raised my voice once. It always comes down to what they didn't read, not what they overlooked, because overlooking implies it was hidden. This wasn't. It was there, plain as day, in Times New Roman, Section 5, Paragraph C. All properties purchased prior to legal union remain. Without exception, the sole and non-transferable possession of the purchasing party, regardless of occupancy, usage, or informal claim, unless renegotiated through a separate, co-signed legal instrument post-marriage. I wrote that clause. I wrote it when the lawyers said it was unnecessary. I wrote it when he smiled and said, "We're not like those couples." I wrote it when love still felt real. And I left it there because loving someone never meant surrendering the right to remain whole. I remembered typing it myself, submitting the draft to the legal office, and asking for it to be incorporated into the prenup without highlighting it in bold or flagging it for review. Because the ones who think they're safe rarely read everything. They assume they're protected by charm, by routine, by the illusion of permanence. But I knew better. I'd seen contracts collapse governments. I'd watched fine print detonate relationships like landmines. And I knew the most powerful weapon is never the one you carry. It's the one they never think you'd use. He had already discovered some of the locks had changed. The codes no longer responded to his voice. The building's concierge refused to hand over a package addressed in my name. He had been forced to ask for clarification from a man at the front desk who didn't recognize him, didn't care about his charm, and simply repeated, "I'm sorry, sir, but your name's not on the file." I imagined his confusion first, then the simmer of indignation. He had lived there, slept there, dressed in suits paid for with my bonuses, leaned against kitchen counters I'd picked from a war catalog of compensation options, bragged about the skyline view to women like trophies. And yet he had nothing under his name. Not the deed, not the title, not even the trash collection. And now, for the first time, he was beginning to realize that the space he claimed as his victory ground was actually a battlefield he'd never even mapped. They hadn't contacted me directly after the first weekend. The silence, I knew, was strategic. He was waiting, testing how much ground I'd take, expecting perhaps that I'd escalate emotionally, that I'd slip, that I'd do something reactive. But I had learned in field intel, the moment you show urgency, you reveal position. So I stayed still, operated in shadows, let the law speak louder than any confrontation could. It took 3 more days for the panic to breach containment. On Wednesday afternoon, my attorney forwarded me an email from his legal representative. It was professionally written, polite in tone, and riddled with thinly veiled desperation. They hoped for clarification regarding certain property matters, requested a review of the initial contractual framework, and, more importantly, asked whether I would be open to renegotiating joint usage agreements in light of the current living situation. My lawyer didn't respond. She called me instead. "It's starting," she said. "They've just realized the House of Cards is missing a foundation." I didn't respond with emotion. I thanked her. Then I opened the prenup again. Not the summary, but the full document. I read it like a field report. Line by line, clause by clause. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for completeness. And there it was. That quiet sentence buried in a sea of routine protections. The clause they never read. The clause he never thought would matter. It had no color, no emphasis, no flashing signal, but it held more power than any confrontation I could have staged. Because it meant that no matter how many smiles he flashed, no matter how many dinner parties they hosted in my absence, no matter how many throw pillows she arranged or candles she lit, none of it mattered. Legally, financially, tactically, none of it belonged to them. They were squatters with good lighting, and I was about to turn the power off. 2 hours later, I received another notification. My attorney had filed a formal motion with the building's HOA and the city, registrar reaffirming my sole legal occupancy and requesting immediate cease and desist. Enforcement against unauthorized use of the premises. The language was cold, precise, unshakable. Words like trespassing, fraudulent claim, and unauthorized occupancy replaced the softness of their prior assumptions. My name was all over the filing, not as a victim, as the owner. The line that followed was my favorite. Legal remedies to be pursued upon failure to vacate within designated time frame, as established under Clause 5C of the prenuptial contract, signed and acknowledged by both parties. They had signed it, willingly. They had sealed their own fate with smug fingertips and thought nothing of it. And now the clause was moving beneath them like a tectonic plate they had never charted. That night, I drove past the building. Not to stare, not to gloat, just to verify. I parked across the street, inside the shadow of a delivery truck. From the distance, the penthouse lights were still on. I could see the faint silhouette of someone moving across the living room. Him, probably. Or her, maybe both. I imagined them arguing, trying to understand why the thermostat reset every hour, why their devices lost internet, why the dishwasher beeped without reason. I had reset all the systems remotely, not to inconvenience them, to remind them slowly that control never belonged to them. I watched as a delivery man approached the lobby, rang the buzzer, waited, then left. I checked my phone. An alert. Unauthorized person attempting package retrieval for Unit 24A. I smiled, turned the screen off, and drove away. The following day, the real estate attorney representing my husband tried to schedule a mediation. They framed it as a conversation about mutual resolution. I declined. Then came the voicemail. His voice, less confident now, still composed, but with a crack in the middle of the third sentence. I just think, maybe we should talk. Like adults. The irony. He had spoken like a dictator in a mirror just a week ago, issuing eviction notices like menu suggestions. Now he wanted diplomacy. I didn't call back. I didn't reply to the email. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and spent the rest of the afternoon rereading old deployment logs. Missions where we waited for days to act. Missions where timing, not firepower, won everything. By the weekend, they had received the official notice: vacate or face litigation. They had 48 hours to remove themselves or be formally charged with unlawful occupancy. I received a brief email from her account, probably typed through clenched teeth. We're doing our best to pack and leave. Just need more time. There's no need to escalate. We can be reasonable. I didn't answer, because I was no longer in dialogue with them. I was in protocol. On Sunday, I returned to the penthouse, not through the front, but through the service elevator I had installed during renovation. I wore black slacks, no makeup, a plain blouse, and a jacket with my insignia pin tucked subtly beneath the lapel. I entered quietly without announcement. The door recognized my biometric scan and unlocked with a sound that was almost a whisper. Inside, it smelled different. His cologne. Her perfume. Food I never bought. I walked slowly through the living room. She appeared from the hallway first, holding a shoebox. Her face drained of color. Then him, shirt untucked. Face pale, I didn't speak. I walked to the kitchen, retrieved the espresso cup she'd once used like it belonged to her, rinsed it, dried it, placed it in the cupboard. He opened his mouth. I raised my hand. You have until midnight. Then I turned, walked to the door, paused, looked back just once. Next time, I said, read everything before you sign. And I left. The forgotten clause had done its job, and the rest was just cleanup. It came at 6:43 a.m., just as I was pouring hot water over loose-leaf tea in the small kitchen of my temporary residence. The steam curled up slowly, quiet, unhurried, the way it does when the air has nothing to prove. My phone vibrated on the counter, the name of my attorney blinking across the screen. I answered without greeting. They've contacted someone, she said. A new lawyer. Not the firm they originally used. This one's louder. I waited. I'd learned not to interrupt. She took a breath. They're arguing the clause. Not with us, internally. He called our office 4 times in 2 hours. I think they didn't know you had drafted the prenup yourself. I didn't answer. The tea steeped. My lawyer exhaled. They're scrambling. Of course they were. The truth about men like him, the polished, practiced kind, is that they don't unravel all at once. They fray slowly, first in disbelief, then in protest, then in desperation. I imagined him pacing the penthouse, phone pressed too tight to his ear, demanding explanations from someone who hadn't read the document either. That was always the most satisfying irony. The people who never read the rules are always the first to scream when someone follows them. The call came to me directly an hour later. Unknown number. I recognized the area code, DC Legal District. I answered on the second ring. A male voice, younger than expected. He introduced himself as representing Mr. and Ms. Carter in an evolving property matter. Ms. Carter. I almost laughed. That woman wasn't a Carter. She was a visitor who had overstayed her borrowed entitlement. I said nothing. The lawyer filled the silence with strategic concern. We're trying to avoid unnecessary escalation here. There seems to be some confusion regarding asset ownership and timelines of marital acquisition. Our clients were under the impression— I stopped him there. That's the problem, I said. They were under an impression. What they should have been under was counsel. He hesitated, likely flipping through tabs on his screen. Regardless of interpretation, we believe this can be resolved in mediation. We're looking to determine if there's room for compromise. I could almost hear the papers in his hand, the scramble to sound reasonable without realizing the other side already held every card. Tell me, I asked, have you read Section 5, Paragraph C? He was quiet for a beat. I'm reviewing that now. Another pause. It's succinct, I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It's also enforceable, fully, and it's been registered with the appropriate authorities. That's what makes this call so disappointing. You're wasting your client's time. He shifted tone slightly, more cautious now. You do understand that prolonged occupancy may establish implied tenancy. I cut him off again. Not under this jurisdiction, and certainly not under federal veteran asset protection law. I heard him click something, keyboard maybe, likely pulling up the case citations now flooding the screen. We were unaware this property had federal ties. His voice lowered. He didn't disclose that. Of course he didn't. Because he thought love erased sovereignty. Because he thought charm overruled documentation. Because he thought a title was a suggestion, not a boundary. We're asking for a week, the lawyer said then. Just time to arrange storage, transition plans. He gave me 3 days, I said calmly, standing in my hallway, telling me to leave a place he never paid for, never signed for, never earned. He gave me until the weekend. There was no reply. I let the quiet sit, thick like static. Then I softened my tone, not from kindness but from clarity. I am not trying to destroy him. I'm simply refusing to be erased. That penthouse was mine before he had my number. The clause is valid. The title is unchallenged. And your clients need to leave. After a moment, he responded with a line I'd heard countless times in combat briefings. I'll relay that. Then he hung up. What came next was a pattern I knew too well. Disorder disguised as coordination. The emails started flooding in. Questions from building management. Inquiries from mutual acquaintances. Thinly veiled social media posts about legal betrayal and complicated housing disputes. A message from an old colleague, distant and diplomatic. Is everything okay? Heard your place is in the middle of something messy. I didn't answer. I wasn't participating in narrative control. I was the control. At 3:14 p.m., I received a voicemail from the man who used to be my husband. His voice was thinner now, not broken but reduced, like someone who had run out of script. I just think this has gotten out of hand. Maybe we made some mistakes. Maybe we rushed things. But do you really want it to end like this? I replayed the message twice. Not for his words, but for the silence between them. He wasn't sorry. He was cornered. And he was hoping I'd still respond like the woman he remembered. The one who handed him money without receipts. The one who signed forms without copies. The one who made room without being asked. That woman was gone. She had left the day he told her to pack by the weekend while his girlfriend sipped espresso from her cup. That evening, I walked past the Penthouse building again. I didn't go inside. I didn't even slow my pace. But I saw them. At the corner, by the side entrance, speaking to a delivery driver. Her hands were flailing. His shoulders were hunched. The driver pointed to the security camera above the door and shrugged. I kept walking. My phone buzzed minutes later. Another alert, unauthorized access denied. I turned the phone off. The next day my attorney called again. They've asked for emergency arbitration. They're claiming emotional distress and lack of alternative housing. I took a sip of coffee. Let them, she hesitated. They've also filed a public statement. That made me pause. Public where? Local real estate forums. Social media. They're framing it as abandonment and financial manipulation. I didn't react. Let them, I repeated. Truth isn't loud, but it lasts. By the end of the week, the story had shifted. The building issued a notice confirming my legal status as sole owner. A neighbor posted a comment under the couple's vague complaint. Wait, I thought she bought that place before they were married. Another replied. She was military, right? It's probably protected. The thread died quickly after that. That's the thing about liars. They rely on momentum. And when you don't feed the fire, it dies in its own smoke. On Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't blocked yet. It read, "She can't do that." Can she? No name? No context. Just panic wrapped in 12 characters. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed 3 words. Not to send, just to see them on screen. She already did. And that, I realized, was the difference between me and them. They believed the law was something you use when you're cornered. I knew it was something you write before you are. The first real crack appeared where they least expected it. Not in the property, not in the title, not in any room they tried to decorate in their image, but in the illusion of liquidity. Because if there's one thing people like them don't prepare for, it's what happens when money that was never truly theirs stops flowing like water. The silence that follows is different from any argument. It's dry, sudden, sterile, a vacuum. One they can't fill with charm, promises, or, let's figure it out. It began on a Wednesday morning. The message arrived just past 8 a.m. from my bank's fraud alert system. Not for my protection. I had already locked down my accounts. But because there had been an attempted charge on a joint emergency credit card that should have been closed weeks prior. An outdated account, left open during better days when I thought emergencies meant hospital visits or travel delays. I had already submitted the paperwork to cancel it entirely, but processing takes time. And so, for a brief window, it still existed, until someone tried to swipe it for a $1,200 charge at a boutique furniture store in Georgetown. I stared at the notification for a moment, then called the bank. Decline all activity, I said. Permanently freeze it. Then close it again. Mark the account compromised. I want records pulled and attached to the file. And notify legal. The agent on the line hesitated, asked if I was safe, and I answered the same way I had in every after-action report I'd ever written. I am. They aren't. Less than 4 hours later, the ripple began. A missed call from a number I recognized. His, but now registered under a different contact name. Maybe he had hoped I wouldn't notice. Maybe he'd forgotten I spent a decade reading people who didn't want to be found. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another call. This time from an unknown number, then a message. Hey, something weird just happened with a card we thought was cleared. Can we talk? Then another. It's causing issues. Might be a mix-up. There was no mix-up. The money had stopped. The drip had dried, and they were thirsty in a desert built from their own deception. By that evening, the real unraveling had begun. A second notification from the same bank, this time tied to a separate account, One I had opened in both names years earlier to cover shared expenses. The balance had been negligible, almost forgotten. But he'd tried to pull from it anyway. Overdraft triggered, freeze activated. When I logged into my dashboard, I saw the pattern clearly. Multiple attempts from different locations. One from a cafe, one from a gas station. One online, all within a 3-hour stretch. Not strategic, desperate. And then came the text, "Why are the accounts locked?" No punctuation. No preamble, because they don't ask until they're cornered. Because they only notice boundaries when they've already crossed them. I didn't reply. I forwarded everything to my attorney. She sent back a single sentence. "Want me to file the audit request?" I wrote, "Do it. It wasn't revenge. It was verification." A paper trail. Proof of misuse. Of entitled behavior masked as confusion. And that was only the beginning. 2 days later, my name popped up on a vehicle registration alert. Years ago, I had co-signed on a car for him, a sleek European sedan he said he needed for client optics. I had signed the papers back then, blindly, during a stretch of long hours and little sleep. I remember the pen feeling too light in my hand, my thoughts too full of foreign soil and missed funerals. At the time, it felt easier to say yes. The kind of yes that women like me were trained to give after a lifetime of deferring need. But I had quietly paid off the balance within the first year. Not because he asked. Because I didn't trust shared debt. The title was in both names, but the lien release was in mine alone. What he didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask, was that the insurance policy had also been under my umbrella. And I had removed him as a covered driver 2 weeks earlier, flagged the car for review, and submitted a notice of co-ownership termination, pending his failure to transfer the title. So when the insurance expired and the bank, finally noticing the accumulated missed payments, flagged the vehicle for repossession, he didn't get a courtesy call, he got a tow truck. The building security feed caught it around 4:15 p.m., a quiet extraction. No lights, no sirens, just a uniformed driver and a clipboard. The car was gone in less than 6 minutes. No resistance. Just absence. I watched the footage from my temporary apartment, sipping coffee, feeling nothing but completion. Later that night, I received a screenshot from someone in the building. A blurry image of him standing on the sidewalk, hands raised in disbelief, the space where his car used to be now empty. Underneath, the neighbor had typed, "What's going on up there?" They were finally starting to notice that something was wrong, that something was ending. And still, he didn't reach out to apologize. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Instead, he sent another message. "Can we please just meet? It's all spiraling. I think you've made your point." The language was familiar, the tone calculated. He still thought I was teaching him a lesson. He didn't understand yet that I had moved beyond the classroom, that I was writing final reports, that this wasn't a warning, it was the filing of facts after the damage was done. Later that night, I received a voicemail from her. The first and only. Her voice was breathy, unsure, carrying a kind of tension I hadn't heard from her before. "I don't know if you meant for it to go this far. He's not okay. I'm not okay. It's just too much. Can we talk? Woman to woman?" I didn't delete the message. I saved it, not for evidence. For memory. For the sound of a woman realizing too late that nothing she sat on ever belonged to her. That luxury by proximity isn't ownership. It's rental with no rights. By the end of the week, I received a formal letter from the bank. Their internal review had concluded that all joint financial obligations were inactive, that misuse had occurred, and that my credit would be unaffected. His, however, had already dropped 112 points. They offered me a direct line to their legal liaison for any further protective actions. I didn't call. Not yet. I went for a walk instead. Past the streets I used to drive with him. Past the bar where he proposed. Past the place we once said we'd turn into our date night spot. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't, because power had shifted. Not violently, not publicly, quietly, fully. Like a tide that pulls back without notice and returns with new rules. That weekend, I logged into one final account, his business website. Not to sabotage, just to check. I'd helped him build it once, back when I thought support meant sacrifice. I still had admin access. It was down, suspended for non-payment. Another invoice left unattended. Another piece of the image collapsed, and all I'd done was remove myself, not scream, not threaten, just walk away and take the foundation with me. It didn't feel like a courtroom, not in the way people imagine them, with oak-paneled walls and towering judges in black robes. It felt more like a waiting room that had been dressed up in quiet authority. A rectangular space with gray carpeting, recessed lighting, and chairs arranged with clinical precision. No audience, no gavel. Just a long table, 3 panelists, and the echo of air conditioning that hummed steadily like it didn't care who won. It was a private hearing, scheduled at their request, not mine. They had asked for discretion, an attempt I assumed to minimize the risk of public humiliation. They thought the room would favor compromise, that somewhere in the folds of formality I'd soften, or at least retreat. What they didn't understand, what they had never understood, is that silence is not surrender. And there is no room that can make a woman like me feel smaller than she's already survived. I arrived early. 15 minutes. Old habit. I wore a black blazer, my insignia pin tucked discreetly near the collar. Not as a statement, but as a reminder to myself of what I'd already endured. Underneath, a dark green blouse, pressed and simple. No jewelry, no perfume. I carried a single folder, nothing red this time, just navy blue, and in it, every document that mattered. I took the seat nearest to the window, not because I needed the light, but because I've learned over time that sitting with your back to anything unknown, even in peacetime, is a risk not worth taking. They arrived together. She went in first. He followed a step behind, no longer leading like he used to. He wore a tailored suit, too sharp for the setting, as if formality might buy him ground he'd already lost. She looked exhausted, less polished than usual, her hair pulled back tightly as though control had become a performance. She didn't meet my eyes when she sat down. He did, briefly, then looked away. The panel introduced themselves, an arbitrator, a property mediator, and a court-appointed observer from the housing authority. They weren't here to judge character, only contracts, titles, timelines. But I knew that when truth enters a room, it doesn't matter how polite the chairs are arranged, it will fill every corner. And I had brought the truth in a folder and in my spine. They began by reviewing the terms already established, the prenup, the deed, the enforcement of federal veteran protections, the notices served, the asset freezes. He sat stiffly, one hand gripping the table's edge, knuckles whitening as each clause was read aloud. I didn't flinch. I had heard these words before, in my own voice, in planning rooms overseas, in war rooms where peace was discussed over maps and reports. The only difference here was that the enemy had worn my last name. The mediator turned to me first. Do you have anything you wish to add before we proceed to counterstatements? I opened my folder, pulled out 3 documents, and slid them across the table. These are confirmations, I said. Dates, payments, and full transaction records for the down payment, renovations, and legal filings tied exclusively to my accounts. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to confirm ownership and enforce removal. He shifted in his chair, about to speak, but his lawyer leaned forward. With respect, we'd like to present a statement of intent from Mr. Carter, as well as mitigating circumstances that may... The arbitrator raised her hand. This isn't a character hearing. We're here to determine whether any legal claim exists that overrides the existing documentation. If not, we move to enforcement of prior rulings. It was clean, cold, unemotional, which made it harder for him. He wasn't used to systems that couldn't be swayed by tone or charm. He was used to rooms that bent when he leaned. But this room stayed still. It did not bend, and he was the one beginning to unravel. He leaned forward anyway. His voice cracked slightly, the first real break I'd heard from him since the day he told me to pack. I didn't realize, when we got married, I thought... He looked at me then, something searching in his eyes. It was ours. We built a life there. The panel stayed silent. I didn't respond. Because no one builds a life with someone who treats shelter like leverage. Who brings another woman into a space not earned? Who uses love as currency and still wants change back? She spoke next. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. I thought we were just starting fresh. I didn't know it wasn't. I didn't think she'd take it all away. The observer jotted a note on his pad, uninterested in drama. I kept my eyes on her. You never once asked if it was yours to enter. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't add weight. Just said it plainly. You sat on furniture you didn't buy, slept in sheets you didn't wash, and laughed in a room you didn't earn. Her eyes dropped to the table. She had no defense. Because she hadn't come to argue. She had come to survive. The panel asked one final question before they recessed. Does either party contest the origin and execution of the prenup and property filings as submitted? Their lawyer hesitated. I watched him. He wanted to object. He wanted to claim oversight or emotional coercion or something abstract enough to delay. But there was nothing. Every paper had a date. Every signature was original. Every clause had been verified. Finally, he exhaled. No contest. That was it. No apology. No admission. Just retreat. They recessed for 30 minutes. During that time, no one spoke. He stared at the wall. She scrolled her phone but never clicked anything. I sat still, like I'd done in briefing rooms waiting for verdicts written in enemy silence. When the panel returned, their decision was brief. Full ownership remains uncontested. Enforcement of existing orders to proceed immediately. Any continued presence in the property by the opposing party will constitute unlawful occupation and result in escalated legal response. They signed the document. The court seal stamped the top page. The gavel wasn't needed. The silence confirmed it. He didn't look at me when we stood. She did, briefly. A flicker of something, loss or recognition, maybe both. Then they walked out, together but not aligned. Their steps no longer matched. I remained for a moment longer, collecting the papers. The panel nodded to me with the kind of respect that doesn't need words. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. Late afternoon sun behind buildings. I took a breath, deep and long, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. Later that night, I received no calls. No messages. No more questions. Only a notification from the building. Occupants have vacated Unit 24A. Keys surrendered. Door code reset per your authorization. The penthouse was mine again. But I wasn't walking back into the same place. I was walking into a space that had been reclaimed. And he, once so certain, so dismissive, so smug in front of that mirror, had finally seen the truth not in my voice, but in the silence that followed it. Because power, real power, doesn't ask to be recognized, it just waits until the moment it can no longer be ignored. The final undoing didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen with signatures or stamps or the tightening of legal language. It happened in the lobby of the building I once chose for its silence. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just fluorescent lights, polished marble, and the sound of two people unraveling beneath the weight of their own illusions. I wasn't supposed to be there when it happened. I had come only to sign a document with the building's new security liaison. Routine, quiet, procedural. A closing loop and a long list of measures meant to seal the perimeter of my life again. I wore plain clothes, civilian. A soft gray blouse, no jacket. No insignia. The kind of outfit that says I'm no longer proving anything to anyone. The front desk clerk waved me over with familiarity. She had seen me 100 times before all of this started. When I was still just a tenant who nodded politely, picked up her packages and disappeared up the elevator. She handed me a clipboard. There's a new digital system going in next week, she said. You'll be the first registered fingerprint. I thanked her, took the clipboard, and signed. I heard the commotion before I saw it. Raised voices echoed differently in that space, bouncing between the marble and glass like angry ghosts. At first, I thought it was just a delivery issue, someone arguing over a missing parcel or a mistyped code. But then I heard my name, not spoken, spat. And then I turned. She stood just beyond the turnstiles, near the lounge area reserved for guests and residents awaiting rides. Her hair was undone, her heels uneven, one strap slipping from her shoulder like even her clothes had stopped cooperating. Her voice cracked as she shouted, not at me, but at him. You told me it was yours. You said we were safe. Her words were fast, slurred not by alcohol but by panic. The kind of panic that only hits when you realize everything you believed was scripted by someone else. He stood still, unmoving, like a man trying to decide whether silence was smarter than defense. But he had never been good at silence. And now that she was peeling him open in public, he had nowhere to hide. You said she signed it over. You said it was in the prenup, she screamed. I moved in with you. I made plans with you. You told me we were building something. His response came too late, too measured. We were. She laughed. Sharp. Wild. No, we weren't. You were borrowing everything. You had nothing. Not even your name on the lights. The lobby had gone quiet. The receptionist had frozen in place. A maintenance worker stood halfway through polishing the floors, mop suspended midair. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because some collapses deserve to echo. She turned then, finally noticing me. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, she looked almost grateful, like she had hoped I'd been wrong this whole time. Like I'd hand her a different ending. Something merciful. But I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I had seen this moment coming since the day she smirked at me on my own couch, sipping from my cup like she belonged. That's the thing about false confidence. It always spills eventually, and it always stains. She moved toward me too quickly. You played me, she said, voice lower now, more venom than volume. You let me think I was safe. You let me sit there while you plotted, while you locked us out. I met her gaze without blinking. I didn't play you. He did. That stopped her. For a second, maybe two. Then she looked back at him. He still hadn't moved. Just stood there like a man watching his own house burn, too proud to run, too broken to rebuild. She turned again, desperate now. He said you gave up. That you walked away. That you didn't want it. I shook my head slowly. I just stopped wanting him in it. The receptionist cleared her throat then, breaking the standoff. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice or step outside. But she wasn't finished. She pointed at me with a trembling hand. You didn't even fight. You just let us take it. Why? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't for her. It was for me, but I said it anyway. Because I wanted you to see what it feels like to lose something you thought you had taken. She didn't reply. She dropped her hand and looked down at her feet like the floor had betrayed her. Then she turned and walked out, heels clacking unevenly against the marble, leaving a trail of humiliation in her wake. He followed a few steps behind, not even attempting to catch up. Just trailing. A shadow of a man who once told me to leave before the weekend. Now he had nowhere to go. I signed the last of the forms with the building's liaison, then rode the elevator up. Alone. The penthouse was clean, empty, still. I walked from room to room, not to check for damage, but to breathe. My breath echoed differently now. It didn't catch in my throat or tighten in my chest. It filled the space like it belonged again. The curtains had been pulled closed. I opened them slowly. The skyline looked exactly the same, but this time I was standing in front of it with my name intact. Not reclaimed. Not recovered, untouched, I made tea. Sat in the chair I loved most. The one they'd pushed into the corner like it didn't fit the aesthetic. I sipped slowly. Checked my phone once. Nothing from them. Not that I expected it. Not anymore. There's nothing left to say when someone has already shown you who they are, and when you've already filed every receipt of who you are in return. That night, I made a new document. Just one page. A letter to myself. I dated it, signed it, titled it. After in it, I wrote, You were not loud. You were not cruel. You were exact. You were every clause, every code, every line they didn't read, and you won not by taking anything from them, but by remembering none of it was ever theirs to begin with. Then I folded the letter, placed it in the navy blue folder, and filed it in the safe. The penthouse was mine again, but more importantly, so was I. The key clicked differently this time. Not louder, not sharper, just final, like the sound of something that knew it would never be undone again. I turned the knob slowly, not because I was hesitant, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the moment. The door swung open without resistance. No alarms, no voices. No footsteps retreating down hallways they never should have stepped into in the first place. Only stillness, thick and undisturbed. The kind that waits for you to breathe before it lets itself move around you. The penthouse smelled faintly of citrus and unfamiliar detergent. Clean, but not mine. As if someone had tried to erase themselves before I arrived, wiping down surfaces they had no right to touch in the first place. The floors were polished. The furniture mostly where I'd left it. The couch had been stripped of pillows. The dining table was bare, except for a single coaster left behind, probably by accident. I walked in without speaking, without sighing, without even blinking too long. I'd imagined this return 100 times in my head. But now that I was here, it didn't need drama. It needed ritual. I placed the keys on the entryway shelf. Then I walked the perimeter of the space the way I used to when returning from a deployment, checking windows, corners, thresholds. Not because I expected danger, but because my body had been taught to reclaim space not with fanfare, but with attention. Every room I entered had once betrayed me, and now each one bowed, quiet and waiting as if ashamed. The bedroom was stripped. The bed I had picked out myself, firm mattress, walnut frame, navy sheets from a catalog I'd dog-eared on a late night overseas, was bare. No sheets, no trace of who had last slept in it. I stood in the doorway for a while, not stepping in, just watching the way the afternoon light fell through the glass panels and caught on the dustless floor. Eventually I entered, sat at the edge of the bed frame, ran my fingers along the wood. It was still mine. It always had been. But now it no longer carried the ghost of someone else's handprint. They were gone, officially, legally, logistically. 2 days earlier, the building had notified me that they'd returned the temporary fobs and cleared the elevator access. The security logs showed their last entry timestamped 3:08 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. No commotion. No resistance. Just a clean exit. After months of pretending the walls were theirs, they had finally stepped out through a door they'd never been invited through in the first place. My attorney confirmed it via email later that night. Unit 24A cleared. No pending disputes. You are, without contest, the sole legal occupant. It was the simplest sentence I'd read in weeks, and it was the most powerful. The kitchen looked untouched, but I opened every drawer anyway. Not because I feared what I'd find, but because I wanted to know which pieces of me they'd tried to rearrange. Some utensils were in the wrong spots. The spice rack had been altered. A strange brand of tea sat in the back of the pantry. Hibiscus, not mine. I placed it into a bag to discard later. I didn't want it in the air I was learning to breathe again. I opened windows one by one. Let the wind sweep through the space like it had missed me. The curtains moved with a gentleness I hadn't felt in months. I stood in the middle of the living room, eyes closed, and listened. Not for sounds, but for quiet. For confirmation that nothing hid in the silence. That I could fill it now on my terms. The last thing I did was reset the smart panel. It was a symbolic gesture more than a practical one. I wiped all user data, recalibrated the voice system, changed the panel's name from the generic home to a single word, sovereign. Then I locked every door, every window, every digital portal. The code was now mine alone. Before bed, I took one final walk through the space. The guest room, once used to stage their belongings, now empty and echoing. The study where I had first found the red folder tucked under my uniform. The closet where my shoes had once shared space with hers. The bathroom mirror that had reflected a version of me that smiled too tightly. I touched nothing. I needed no candles, no ritual burning, just recognition. These rooms had been touched, but they were not ruined. They had been entered, but not claimed. And now they had returned, quiet, waiting, ready. That night, I slept with the balcony doors slightly open. The breeze moved through the apartment without obstruction. I didn't flinch at distant city sounds. I didn't wake at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. I didn't dream of slammed doors or smirking voices. I dreamt of stillness. And when I opened my eyes at dawn for a brief second, I forgot to brace for the day. That, I realized, was what peace actually felt like. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of warning. I brewed coffee the way I used to, poured it into the mug with my insignia faded near the base. I took it to the balcony. The view was the same but sharper. Buildings, movement, life. But this time I wasn't watching from behind a wall. I was part of it again, present, no longer displaced by the shadow of someone else's ambition. A week passed. Then another. I filled the rooms with purpose. Not decoration, intention. A chair I loved. A rug from a market I once visited during a leave. Books I had boxed away when I thought I was preparing to leave forever. I opened them again. I read in the afternoons. I took naps in sunlight. I cooked meals and left dishes in the sink because I wanted to, not because someone expected perfection. I reclaimed not just space, but behavior. The building staff greeted me like they always had, except now there was an added respect in their eyes. A quiet acknowledgement. They had watched it unfold piece by piece, and now they saw what happened when a woman doesn't just come back, but rises. Eventually, I replaced the final lock on the front door. It had worked fine, but I wanted it changed, not out of fear, but as punctuation, a final period in a sentence I had written in full. The locksmith didn't ask why. He didn't need to. When I closed the door behind him, I pressed my palm flat against the new bolt. It clicked softly, not like an ending, but like a vow. And in that silence, the penthouse finally became what it had always been, mine. I've been to borders that don't appear on maps, some made of sand and wire, some marked by flags fluttering in wind that smells of fire, some invisible, stitched into the air between two people who once shared everything and now speak in the language of silence. But none of them, not a single one, ever demanded from me what this one did. The final threshold. The invisible line between my past and what I now claim as sovereign territory. Not a battlefield, not a mission abroad, but the doorway of my own home. That doorway, where I had once stood in uniform, holding keys to a place I believed would protect me, became something else entirely. A front line. Not of war, not of violence, but of erasure. Of being quietly, insidiously replaced. I had faced armed men with steadier breath than the moment I stood across from my husband, who calmly asked me to leave the penthouse I had bought before he ever said, "I do." It wasn't just betrayal. It was displacement. Not from a place, but from my own life. People assume that strength is about muscle, or tone of voice, or the ability to bark orders in a storm. But in all my years of service, I learned that true strength lives in control. In waiting. In knowing exactly when to strike, and more importantly, when not to. I didn't throw the glass when she laughed from the couch. I didn't scream when he tightened his tie and said, "The lawyers will handle everything." I didn't even raise an eyebrow when she suggested I should be out by the weekend. Instead, I nodded. I packed. And I left, but I didn't walk away. I advanced. I moved like I was taught to, methodically, silently, with strategy rooted in preparation. I was trained for enemy territory, but no one tells you what to do when the betrayal comes from inside the wire. So I adapted. I shifted from combat boots to court shoes, from battle plans to legal codes. I studied contracts like maps. I followed trails not of footprints, but of financial transactions and missed clauses. I mounted my comeback not in a battlefield, but in notarized forms, binding clauses, and the unwavering memory of exactly who paid for what. And I never raised my voice. Not once. I've led soldiers. I've stood at funerals and folded flags for families. I've seen young men lose their futures in lands they barely understood. I know what grief is, what discipline costs. I know what it's like to carry something heavy alone. But nothing weighed more than pretending I hadn't seen the way he slowly replaced me in the spaces I created. First with mockery, then with absence, then with her, and still, I never screamed because I was listening to everything he thought I'd never notice. The missed payments. The title never transferred. The lawyer's name who'd once flirted with me at a base fundraiser and later would take my call with a stunned silence when I said, "This is not revenge. It's enforcement." Every detail mattered. Every date. Every receipt. Every document I had signed alone, while he claimed partnership. I watched it all like an operation, step by step, and waited for the exact moment when silence would become strategy. He thought I was walking away defeated. What I was doing was securing the perimeter. People assume you need to yell to reclaim space. But that's only if you want to be noticed. I didn't want to be noticed. I wanted to win, so I moved like smoke. Like a classified memo routed through secure lines. Like a drone that sees everything before making a single move. He never saw it coming. Neither did she. One moment they were toasting wine over takeout in my dining room, and the next, he was holding a phone, white-knuckled, while his lawyer said, "She moved everything under her name. Weeks ago, legally, ironclad. And me? I was standing in line at the base cafeteria, answering my phone with a quiet, 'Yes, I anticipated that.' Some battles don't end in gunfire. They end in deposits frozen, locks changed, legal declarations that echo like detonations. And when I stepped back into that penthouse alone, I realized I wasn't just returning to a place, I was re-entering myself. Every inch of silence in that apartment wasn't empty. It was earned. It was mine. And it was held. There's a reason soldiers salute at the threshold of important rooms. It's not just tradition. It's reverence. A silent recognition of space that demands respect. I didn't salute when I re-entered the apartment. But something in me did. Something deeper than muscle memory. Something older than pride. I remembered the woman I was when I first bought this place. Young, decorated, proud. Not for the medals, but for what they represented. Resilience. Survival, integrity. And I thought about how she would feel seeing what had become of her sanctuary. But then I looked around, at the light on the walls, the silence in the air, the weightless feeling in my chest, and I realized she would be proud. Not because I fought back, but because I didn't let anyone define what strength looked like for me. They wanted me out because they thought I wouldn't fight. They forgot that I've been trained my entire adult life not to lose ground I've earned, and when I finally changed the last lock, when the final file was closed, when his access was revoked, when she stopped calling my name in building lobbies like she had ever mattered, there was no celebration. There was only breath. Deep. Even. Final. They had tried to turn me into a ghost in my own home, but instead, I made them disappear. In my career, I've defended borders. I've enforced peace where there was none. I've stood guard over people who didn't even know I was protecting them. And now I realize I was always preparing for this, not to fight wars for others, but to recognize when my own had begun and win it quietly, with grace, with law, with discipline, and with the unwavering knowledge that sometimes the last border you defend isn't geographical, it's personal. And this time, I won it for myself.